When a boy grows up to say, I'm really a girl, and a girl moves off to college to say, it's actually my body, my choice, I think it's safe to assume that these children grew up hearing the wrong stories. And I first pondered this miseducation of our children when my husband led a summer book club discussion of Rod Dreher's The Benedict Option at our church. On page 210, we read this. If Christianity is a true story, then the story the world tells about sexual freedom is a grand deception. It's fake. As novelist Walker Percy advised, we have to attack the fake in the name of the real. Christians are going to have to become better tellers of our own story. Young people are not going to be argued into Christian chastity or browbeaten by moralistic maxims. Beauty and goodness embodied in great art and fiction and in the lives of ordinary Christians, married and single, is the only thing that stands a chance. I believe Dreher understands that stories have always been a part of how we pass down what is good and beautiful and true to our children. But as more and more parents are turning over the care of their children to preschools and daycare facilities and public schools and after-school programs and state universities and tablets streaming Netflix and smartphones lighting up from TikTok, parents are no longer controlling the narrative of the stories being passed down to their children. Think about it. The serial shows on television, the movies in theaters, the magazines in the checkout line of the grocery store, the commercials interrupting our podcasts, the billboards lining our interstates, the ads appearing on smartphones as we scroll through social media, the required reading assignments in public schools. These worldly stories continually confront our children and assault their formative memories with plots that are evil and ugly and false. For example, ladies, you should wear your shirts like this to be beautiful. Gentlemen, you should sit in a dark room and fight zombies on a screen rather than work to defend the oppressed outside your door. Young adults, it's so much easier to have a sexual experience between yourself and a screen rather than get married and risk pregnancy and have to live and converse with that imperfect person down the pew. Humans, your biology is separate from your spirit, and your biology may be lying to you. Whatever your mind says is what is true. Ignore your body. These are false stories, yes. These are false stories that disregard the stewardship of our fathers. They weaken the strongest in our community. They defame what is holy in the church, and they poison the consciences of our children. My husband is pastor of University Lutheran Church at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and we live amongst college students. It is a blessed life. For those of you who know our personal story with barrenness, you can imagine the joy we experience every day in being foster parents to 50-plus college students. It's a privilege to receive your children and to be given the opportunity to amen all of your excellent, wise parenting. And it makes our evenings longer and our mornings shorter to have these students be our family in the faith. What passion and curiosity reside in the heads and in the hearts of our young people. But do you know what else resides there? Fear and distrust of everything coming out of the mouth of anyone older than them. For so many of these children have grown up reading and hearing and watching and absorbing false stories that assert that they are omniscient, that no outside source is as trustworthy as their own feelings. They are certain they know what is best for themselves, and anyone who asserts otherwise is an ignorant, indoctrinated false prophet of the dead past who simply refuses to sing along with Elsa, "Let It Go." How did these children come to trust their corrupted gut more than God's eternal word? Well, after listening to hours of conversations between these precious people, I suspect it has something to do with Cinderella and Ariel and Elsa and Anna, as well as Monica, Ross, Rachel, Phoebe, Joey, and Chandler, and Modern Family, and Parks and Rec, and Sex and the City, and Games of Thrones, and recent Marvel movies, and even VeggieTales. For many of our present college students were raised in homes dominated by screens. Much of their free time was spent absorbing serial television. And while not every televised program and YouTube channel tells false stories necessarily, I can tell you as a writer that much of the modern television programming that I've witnessed follows a storytelling formula that ensures certain social agendas are always being covered in the plot, and in a way that narrates lies surrounding sexual identity, the sanctity of life, the good order of creation and marriage, and the strength of men. There is a consistent, systematic, blatant disordering of God's created order in these stories, and nothing is being hidden in this regard, yes? And when generations of children have been raised being completely occupied every moment of every day by some sort of program, whether it's a televised program or a sports program or an arts program, you name it. When these children have had few opportunities to grow bored, to daydream, to experience what happens to their bodies and minds and emotions when they are not occupied. When they've had minimal time to enjoy unregulated play or to relate to peers and talk with each other and make messy, wonderful, formative relationships. When they don't have a lot of real-life experiences with real people, they cannot help but bond with those fake experiences and fake people they know from the television. It's not uncommon for conversations amongst college students to be centered around Disney or Game of Thrones or the show Friends or countless other streamed programs. And sadly, those Hollywood scripted shows are the memories everyone shares. And those designed to disorder plots, those are the common experiences with which they relate to each other. So what do we do about it? How do we reclaim the hearts and minds? It's the attention of our children. Well, we have to turn off the television for sure. We have to power down our devices. We need to pick out the books to be read before bedtime, and we need to model, Lord help us, chastity and charity and temperance and kindness and patience in our own lives. As Rod Dreher suggests, we have to become better tellers of our own story. God help us. Bo Geertz, the most celebrated storyteller in Lutheranism, he writes, "People often think they are free when they put themselves above God's commands and don't do what he wants. Actually, they only stop serving one power and begin serving another. Jesus tells us there is only one way to find true freedom, to remain in his word, listening, receiving, and understanding." Oh, I'm so sorry. "Then they perceive truth, and the truth sets us free, truly free." I will make a handout of these quotes if you would like them and distribute them, and you just have to listen to them from me, I guess. We need more of this truth that sets us free in the stories that our children are consuming. We need to read and discuss books with them that teach toward virtue and away from vice, so our youth can recognize tyranny and slavery to sin when they see it. And they need to know they are not alone. When the time of persecution inevitably comes, we know this is true from our Lord's word. When it inevitably comes, when their character and endurance are put to the ultimate test, it's helpful for them to know that they are in good company. They stand with Jesus and the Apostle Paul and Samwise Gamgee and Joseph Lasta and Charles Wallace and Katniss and the Reverend John Ames and Robbie Jones and saints. Oh, good, you recognized. Been stressing about that one. No. Saints and angels and hundreds of years of fictional heroes who have been tested and tried and even triumphed. Think of it this way. A child is born having no formative memories of virtues and vices. At least we hope he hasn't, because to have firsthand knowledge of tyranny and sloth and intemperance would suggest that the child has been abandoned or deceived by a parent or abused by an adult or has endured some unthinkable suffering, yes? But a child, an unknowing child, can still know that patience is a virtue, that joy accompanies charity, that self-sacrifice has its rewards, and that chastity is a beautiful, worthy aspiration, because he has heard the story of Joseph in Egypt, and Isaac on the altar, and Frodo in Mordor, and Bigwig in Watership Down, and Anne in Avonlea. These characters and stories, fiction or nonfiction, they give children memories of virtues before they experience them themselves. These stories teach children into a thought pattern and into a mindset and behavior that is virtuous and that is free. In his epic novel, Island of the World, here we go, author Michael D. O'Brien explores the role arts plays in procuring this mindset of freedom. He writes, in music, in poetry, in literature, even in novels without political or historical references, we can apprehend what is not immediately known through rational thought or the accumulation of objective facts. Culture is the last refuge, the sanctuary, the human place in the midst of the surrounding dehumanization. Through the arts, man is able to know himself, even if only on the intuitive level. He senses his own worth, even when he cannot articulate it. When a work of art is both beautiful and true, man's freedom is strengthened by it, both his interior need for freedom and his capacity to seek a rational understanding of it. Now, I'm preaching to the choir, I know. But let me reiterate some obvious things for the sake of good ordered conversation. Individual families do need to build up their personal libraries with excellent stories. Now, what books are excellent and good for owning? Well, anything by Gloria Press, obviously. Honestly, there are smarter people than me to answer this question. I think we all should take a cue from Anthony Eslin's reading list, that's for sure. And personally, I turn to Cheryl Swope, and Michael Swope, and Julia Habrecht, and Joy Pullman, Heather Smith, Rebecca Curtis, Christina Roberts, and Michael Schuermann for advice on what to read. Who in your life do you trust for good book recommendations? I'm hoping that this very room proves to be a safe and beneficial space for asking and receiving advice on how to stock our home shelves. In fact, I plan to speak for 40 minutes only this morning, hence our prompt start, in hopes that the last 5 minutes of our time together may be spent discussing this very thing. But my point is this: how will children remember and pass down the best of stories if we don't keep telling them the best of stories? How will they know to stand behind the one-shot Finches in life and to avoid conversing with the George Wickhams at dances? If teachers neglect assigning virtuous reads, or worse than that, forego them altogether for pet pleasure reads instead. It was around my third semester of teaching music literature courses in the collegiate system when I realized a rather unsettling truth. Teaching is sometimes boring. While Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is a revolutionary, exciting example of change in sonata allegro form, it grows rather predictable and, dare I say it, unromantic with each additional hearing. Do not tell my timpanist husband that I said that. I learned that to teach year after year is monotony, even genius monotony. A good teacher checks his self-interests at the door for the good of preserving the canon. For it would be an error to graduate a violin major who has never rehearsed and performed Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It would be a disservice to that student to send him into the world with such an historically significant hole in his repertoire. And so a college orchestra director resigns himself to rehearsing and teaching that same piece over and over again, at least once every 4 years throughout his entire career, lest Beethoven's Fifth fall into disuse and even oblivion. Even though that teacher might really prefer to spice up the semester with an obscure Strauss piece every now and then, right? And the same lesson can be applied to teaching literature. A teacher may prefer the swift pace of P.D. James over Jane Austen's storytelling, or perhaps Emily Bronte's passion over Charlotte Bronte's restraint. But the risk of teaching a full unit on murder and passion over humility and temperance is to birth a voting adult into society who has no knowledge of Darcy's repentance and humility or Helen's compassion and redemption. I am continually horrified to hear what the young people in my life are being asked to read in public schools these days. Stories focusing on self-identity, self-fulfillment, and self-idolatry. And it's the horror of what they are no longer reading. Stories of self-sacrifice, love, chastity, decency, kindness, real kindness. That's actually what prompts this very presentation. For example, a recent junior in high school enrolled in advanced English was assigned Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead to read, but no Dostoevsky or Orwell. In a recent senior AP Lit class in the state of Montana, the students in the class were required to read Kate Chopin's The Awakening, but no Jane Austen was ever assigned to the students throughout their high school career. In the highest track of English Lit in an Illinois public high school, Toni Morrison's Beloved was required reading, but no Mark Twain or William Faulkner or Wendell Berry or Irene Hunt made it onto the syllabus. And many recent high school graduates confessed to me that in their highest level literature classes, substantial time was devoted to choosing their own book to read and study. Let's bring back my original Wendell Berry quote for the win. It is not from ourselves that we learn to be better than we are. And we know that if left to the world and its false stories, our children will learn to be worse than they are. Mark Bauerlein expertly assesses the present crisis in his book released this past February. It's called The Dumbest Generation Grows Up. It is too long for me to put on the screen for you to read, I'm sorry. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, American teens were swept by a tidal wave of technology, and it killed reading habits that were already fragile. The high schools and colleges didn't rise to the threat and reassert the sublimity of the greats and the necessity of culture. A genuinely revolutionary deterioration took place, greater than any ever seen before, and the mentors stood silent and passive. They lacked the certitude needed to slow and reverse it. And the decline is a fact. The SAT and ACT scores don't lie, and the number of English and history bachelor's degrees awarded by Stanford went from 98 and 75, respectively, in the year 2000, to 47 and 35 respectively in 2020. Millennials in adulthood aren't upping their humanities experience after graduation either. Their reading skills fell below those of their predecessors, and they don't care. They don't want to read. The intellectual equipment and predilection that a reading life in adolescence and a core curriculum in high school and college would have supplied, they don't have. End of quote. Schools aside, public schools aside, even popular bookstores want our children turned inward and away from Christ's truth that sets us free. A quick search online revealed this list published by Barnes & Noble. It's 16 books everyone should read before high school. As you take note of the titles and the authors listed, be sure to notice what titles and authors are absent. And allow me, as you're perusing the list, allow me to read you the description of just one of these must-reads. Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. If you've spent much time on the Barnes & Noble teen blog, do not do that. You've probably met Simon. Albertalli's debut is the joyful, squee-inducing story of a small-town boy falling in love with a male classmate via anonymous emails, though he isn't yet out to his family and friends. It's about first love and coming out and coming of age and the awkwardness of determining who you are while other people are watching. Albertalli nails the feeling of trying to change under the eyes of your parents and the sense that becoming yourself requires one exhausting public declaration after another. Simon gets it. And teens starting high school need him. I'd like to point out this book was written by a woman. No wonder boys think their feelings, not their chromosomes, determine their sex. How could they not when they are being asked to read Morrison, Rand, Chopin, and Albertalli, apparently, as if they are the Bible? No wonder girls are convinced their existence is autonomous from their own body parts. When the stories they are told to read trumpet individualism over family and self-fulfillment over service to neighbor. When our children who have lived very little life outside of the classroom, when they are required to read only fake stories, then they are being programmed into a life and an understanding of humanity and of God himself that is false. Our children are being ushered into battle against powers and principalities, but with no armor and with no friend. Bauerlein continues to write, "What have we done to them? We have made the past a repository of irrelevant and unknown strivings. They aren't interested. As for the present, it's a battleground of dreams nursed in adolescence, pitted against rent, job, car, breakups, and aging. The knowledge of the passion and of Appomattox, the ruminations of Elizabeth Bishop and Nick Adams, the music of Satie and Brubeck, Thomas More and the Tower, and the Invisible Man in his basement, those touchstones would have negotiated a modest peace in their hearts and souls, but they aren't available. Our unread millennials went to college and believe in diversity. They have online friends who tender support. They work pretty hard and play pretty hard, but they're not as worldly and adept and articulate as they think they are. Older coworkers and neighbors aren't as impressed with them as their buddies are, and it doesn't seem right. People aren't what they're supposed to be, they believe. Their ideals keep losing out to circumstance." What can we do for children who've already grown up without hearing the great stories? Certainly we can petition and advocate for our schools to bring back the greats that have been stricken from reading lists. We can shore up the home front and beef up our own personal libraries. We can fund and build private schools and colleges that hallow and teach what is good and beautiful and true. For our own part, my husband and I are trying to foster a community at UniLou that reads and hears and sings stories together regularly and through a variety of media. Primarily, we gather around the Bible and the hymnal several days out of the week, and the divine service, Bible studies, prayer services, and seasonal memorization challenges. Would you like to join us in memorizing Psalm 139 this summer? We host 1 or 2 Shakespeare nights a semester where everyone comes with an anthology in hand, print or digital, mainly digital, as you can see in these pictures. A play is chosen and parts are divvied out accordingly. It's so fun. We host monthly Masterpiece Theater events, showing the students an enriching movie they most likely have never seen before, and then lead a discussion of it afterward. We also host a book club every summer during break when they don't have to read as much. Presently, we're reading and discussing Dante's The Divine Comedy. The discussions are fabulous. We stock the Commons with excellent magazines addressing current issues reasonably and faithfully. And this fall, we plan to implement some read aloud events where students can bring their puzzles, their knitting, and their embroidery. No, really, they love handcrafts. They really do. They can bring their handcrafts to work on while we read a story aloud to them. And Edna Hong's Bright Valley of Love is up first. We also try to read and write or make music in front of the students as much as possible. Whenever we lower ourselves onto a couch or an easy chair in the Commons with a choice title in hand, inevitably, a student plops down next to us and either wants to pull out a book and read quietly at the same time or discuss it not so quietly while we're trying to read. We also feed the students lunch after church on Sundays. Why is that important? We do this during the semesters. In the summers, we have dinner, supper together on Wednesday nights. We do this because we want to encourage them to talk face-to-face with each other around a unified gathering of intentional community. Believe it or not, that's a thing that's being lost in our culture. We encourage them to talk about their classes, about choir music, about life in general. Finally, we invite them into our home as often as possible, and we sing songs around the piano. We play games, or we just cook and talk. What we can't do in our home is watch television, because my husband and I don't own one. What continues to amaze me is that no student has ever commented on the fact of what is missing in our home. No one notices we have no television. Why is that? There is still one more thing that all of us can do. We can pray. But we can do one other thing to combat false stories assaulting our children. We can get better at telling our own story. As Dreyer says, we can even write new, hopefully winsome, stories about old, true things. Sure, Silas Marner and Farmer Boy and A Tale of Two Cities, they are all good for teaching a boy the merits of labor and self-sacrifice, but they don't address the present evils assaulting the eyes and ears of our men. Part of why I tried my own hand at writing fiction 13 years ago was because I wanted my own nieces and nephews to have stories to read that address same-sex attraction, abortion, and end-of-life issues, but framed in a narrative of truth as we know it from Scripture. And since then, I've had quite a bit of time and opportunity to consider the question, what makes for a good story? Malcolm Guite, he is an English poet and Anglican priest. He writes, "Great literature is not an exclusive cultural acquisition, a badge of educated status, or something on which academics can hang their displays of erudition. It is there, in the words of Philip Sidney's Defense of Poetry, quote, to delight and instruct, end quote. First and foremost, it delights, and then it leads to truth, teaching us something worth knowing. It could be said that both of these simple aims have been lost sight of in our age. To delight and instruct. That is the work of the great works. And if you consider what truly delights and instructs in this created world, then we quickly discern that every good story is a mere reflection of the greatest, truest story ever told, namely the fall of man into sin and God's work of salvation for him in Jesus Christ. Think about it. From Narnia to Middle Earth, even to Hogwarts, the stories that endure, or the stories we love to read over and over again, they preach to us the ultimate truth from Scripture, that greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov, right? C.S. Lewis's Aslan, right? J.R.R. Tolkien's Gandalf, even J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, the boy who fulfilled a prophecy, the boy who knew the help of a resurrection stone. These are very old themes. Even O. Henry's Jimmy Valentine. The best and most celebrated heroes in the stories we love, they give up their own lives that others might live. And there are many variations of that trope. Some more subtle, some not. This is not an accident. This is truth reflected in fiction. And I think it's important to note that these iconic, beloved heroes are Christological in nature. They are not Muhammadological. They are not Buddhological. In other words, the actions, nature, vision, and purpose of these central characters consistently mirror those of Jesus Christ rather than those of any false prophet. Truth in story, it seems, finds its fulfillment in the self-sacrifice of Jesus Christ rather than the self-fulfillment of Muhammad or Buddha or you and me. What is celebrated in the greatest stories? Love of neighbor over love of self. Service over ambition. Virtue over power. Humility over honor. Good over evil. That's what makes you cry in a good book, is actually when you see the truth on the page. The greatest and truest tales can't help but point toward the love of God shown to us in the sacrifice of his son, rather than in the ambition and glory of lesser human prophets. If my discussion right now of what makes for a good story is agitating your own creative juices, then let me remind you, there is room for more Lutheran storytellers in this big, wide world. Umberto Eco writes, and he is not Lutheran, he writes, quote, "Man is a storytelling animal by nature," end quote. I think we Lutherans are the best people to tell stories to our children. We may even be the best people to write stories for our children. I believe writing is a God-given talent. I do. And I say that from my experience. I'm pretty sure I could not write anything good apart from his good giving. Certainly, every good and perfect gift is from above. And he equips us with everything good that we may do his will, working in us what is pleasing in his sight. This is most certainly true. I'd like to add, though, that writing is a privilege. Wendell Berry explains, "It is the privilege and the labor of the apprentice of creation to come with his imagination into the unimaginable and with his speech into the unspeakable." If you are someone who desires to come with your imagination into the unimaginable, and I think some of you are, if you have a desire to come with your speech into the unspeakable, May God grant you the opportunity, the ability, and the fortitude to do so. And all for the sake of our children and our friends and our family and our church. And in an effort to be encouraging, allow me to share with you this scandalous fact. I, a published author, did not learn to read till I was in the first grade. But I learned to tell a story long before that, long before I could read. It all started with my parents. They surrounded us with stories. They filled our home with books, and not just books made up of words, but books filled with colorful pictures and vibrant paintings and music notes. They took me and my sisters to church every Sunday and feast day. Thinking about them moves me, sorry. Thanks be to God, they filled our ears with Bible stories, which are ancient truths and wisdom set to a meter older than English. So formative. They let our brains steep in the hymns of the church, which simply put, they are stories of suffering and salvation set to rhyme. Are they not, Cantor? My parents, don't judge them, put Barbies and baby dolls and Lincoln Logs and Legos in our hands that we might practice making up stories of our own. That's what I was doing. Perhaps my parents' greatest stroke of genius when it came to raising storytellers is that they gave us time to grow bored. They limited television. They turned off the computer when we finally got one. They pushed us outside in the summer months that we might learn to use our imaginations to fill time and space with thoughts and ideas and stories grander than the ones we were living. They gave us chores to do. I still have like a sensory memory of the clouds of gnats hanging above the peas in the garden and just did not want to lean over and touch them at all because of it. You'd breathe in bugs. Yeah. Now it's my favorite thing to do is to garden with my parents. They gave us chores to do, and what they were doing is they were busying our hands, but freeing our brains to conjure up all kinds of adventures, ways to kill gnats. Essentially, they were breeding expert daydreamers, can you tell? Teacher and philosopher Anthony Eslin, he explains it this way in his book, 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child. Recall that the imagination is a natural faculty in man. Some people make the mistake of fostering it, but it is often so powerful on its own that it will assert itself if we simply allow people to live what used to pass for an ordinary life. If you are breathing hard from the airborne soot of a city, all it may take for your lungs to clear again is to spend a week in the country. And all it might take for the imagination to breathe again is some time in solitude and silence. Wendell Berry goes so far as to protect and stimulate his imagination by not owning a computer. He writes, his mind is free to go with his feet. I always want to say, but what about a laptop? In Island of the World, which I already gave you a little piece of, poet Joseph Lasta strolls through Central Park and is distressed to find boys driving remote control toy motorboats in a pond, a version of pretend play he suspects ultimately to be harmful to their imaginations. Joseph does not quite approve of this electronic play. Something bothers him about it. Something is detached that should not be detached. It is control, amplified to the level of metaphorical loss. A child should get wet in the ocean. He should ride the deck of a ship or become the ship, if possible. But he should not drive it as if he were a dissociated God. Boom. Anne Sullivan, teacher to Helen Keller, describes her concern about protecting a child's imagination in this response given to someone offering her more kindergarten materials. No, I don't want any more kindergarten materials. All the red is my own editing, just so you know. Okay, if you haven't caught on. I am beginning to suspect all elaborate and special systems of education. They seem to me to be built up on the supposition that every child is a kind of idiot who must be taught how to think. Whereas if the child is left to himself, he will think more and better if less showily. Let him go and come freely. Let him touch real things and combine his impressions for himself, instead of sitting indoors at a little round table while a sweet-voiced teacher suggests that he build a stone wall with his wooden blocks. I just now noticed the juxtaposition of that, sorry. Or make a rainbow out of strips of colored paper, or plant straw beds in bead flower pots. Such teaching fills the mind with artificial associations that must be got rid of before the child can develop independent ideas out of actual experiences. George Eliot diagnosed this problem of being distracted to death 163 years ago in her novel, Adam Bede. If you have not read it, please do. It's one of my new campaigns. Surely all other leisure is hurry, compared with a sunny walk through the fields from after church. As such walks used to be in those old leisurely times when the boat gliding sleepily along the canal was the newest locomotive wonder, when Sunday books had most of them old brown leather covers and opened with remarkable precision, always in one place. Leisure is gone, gone where the spinning wheels are gone, and the pack horses and the slow wagons and the peddlers who brought bargains to the door on sunny afternoons. Ingenious philosophers tell you perhaps that the great work of the steam engine is to create leisure for mankind. Do not believe them. It only creates a vacuum for eager thought to rush in. Even idleness is eager now, eager for amusement, prone to excursion trains, art museums, periodical literature, and exciting novels, prone even to scientific theorizing and cursory peeps through microscopes. Old leisure was quite a different personage. He only read one newspaper, innocent of leaders, and was free from that periodicity of sensations which we call post-time. He was a contemplative, rather stout gentleman of excellent digestion, of quiet perceptions, undisguised by hypothesis, happy in his inability to know the cause of things, performing the things themselves. Certainly, it is countercultural to be happy in our inability to know the cause of things. Imagine an existence where we worked the ground the way our parents taught us, rather than leaning on the spade and first Googling the latest and best way to till the soil. Maybe some of what we desire for our children can be reclaimed in the practice of stepping away from the screens and the internet and the distractions and the diversions and the programs and the occupations, and just perform the things themselves. Maybe it is in this contemplative time of excellent digestion that our children's imaginations will be able to breathe again, as Esalen suggests. And maybe then, just maybe, they will turn their attention back toward us with open ears. And maybe that will be the very moment to tell them a story. Our story. And may God make us ready for that moment. Dear friends in Christ, I had a few friends help me compile a list of recommended books for teaching toward virtues and away from vices. It is not comprehensive because it is limited by the people. But my friends Becky Curtis and Joy Pullman helped me. These are just our humble recommendations. I made 40 copies, but here's what I will do. I send out a monthly newsletter through my website. My website is easy to find. It's just my name, 2 N's on Schuermann, katieschuermann.com. On that homepage, there's a green button that you click in which you will subscribe to my newsletter. And on my next newsletter, I will be sure to include this. And I will also include the quotes from my presentation today. That's probably the easiest and fastest way for me to disseminate that. But Cantor, Mr. Roberts, may I just ask you guys, one down each, to just kind of pass them out. But for time's sake, why don't you just go ahead with no good order, shout out what you think might be an example of a book that teaches toward chastity and away from lust. Let them out.
Idiot by Dostoevsky. Say it again. Idiot by Dostoevsky.
Thank you, Nastya. Also, say it again because your accent's amazing to it. Do it again. Do it again.
Idiot by Dostoevsky.
Dostoevsky, thank you. I love it. Okay. Another one. Toward chastity, away from lust. Adam Bede by George Eliot. Beautiful story. How about a book that teaches toward patience and away from wrath? Is there a story you read where you were just so moved by the patience of Aragon as he waited for his...
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The people were waiting for Aslan to come.
Thank you, sir. Who's the author?
J.R.R. Tolkien.
You're close. You're very close. You got this. Yes, you got it. Yay. Excellent suggestion. Thank you. Okay. Any others? Patience. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So The Hobbit, who's the author? Do you remember? J.R.R. Tolkien? Yes. Excellent for teaching patience, staying on the path, not wandering away, being patient with what you've been given, right? Excellent example. How about teaching toward charity and away from greed?
The Wind in the Willows.
The Wind in the Willows. Who's the author? Thank you so much.
The Princess and the Goblin.
Princess and the Goblin? Yes. Who's the author?
George MacDonald.
Christy, I have not read any of his works.
Oh.
I know. Huge hole. Straight through my heart and my brain. I know. Will you email what I should start with? Will you send me what you think? In order. Thank you. Okay. Any more? Toward charity, away from greed. Pinocchio. I once babysat for a boy named Ben, and they rented Pinocchio back when there were VHS tapes, and I put it in, and it was El Pinocho. We watched it. Yeah, it was great. How about toward temperance and away from gluttony? Yes, patience.
We read one the other year. That was about The Year Money Grew on Trees by Aaron Hawkins.
The Year Money Grew on Trees by Aaron Hawkins. Thank you. Okay, good to know. Is somebody taking notes for us? Okay. Well, Silas Marner by George Eliot. Another. It's hard to miss how gluttony destroys humanity through that. Okay, one more. How about kindness, true kindness, because that word gets thrown out all the time. What books teach toward kindness and away from envy? Little Women by? Thank you. Excellent. Any others?
Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh by?
A.A. Milne.
Thank you.
Little Men is also good.
I have never read Little Men, but I've heard it's excellent. Okay, I need to. Another big hole right there. Okay. Yeah. Any others?
The Five Little Peppers.
That's okay. The Five Little Peppers? E.S. Nesbit? Okay. Or E.B. Nesbit? Okay.
J.K. Rowling's The Christmas Pig.
Okay, good to know. The Christmas Pig. That's a great title. The Christmas Pig. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me opine on, I'm hoping those of you who have a little bit of inspiration to write yourselves. We need good stories. We do. Thank you.